So imagine with me, you and I are backpacking through Spain, and all of a sudden we look to our left and we see this. We see this. And I'm a lifelong city girl, and I know my geography pretty well, that I know I was not participating in the running of the bulls in Pamplona, Spain. But that day, I was on mile 15 of a 20-mile day, and I felt like that when I actually saw this. The herd of cows was coming at me and was about to join me on walking on this historic pilgrimage on the Camino de Santiago. My feet are swollen and blistered, and I'm like, my mile per hour is not as quick as their mile per hour. And so I'm like, okay, what do I do? Because they walk out of this way pretty quick and join me on this pathway. And on the path, there's arrows that point me in the right way to go. And so I'm like, maybe they're going to join me on the Camino, like the pilgrimage. But I'm like, I've got dirt walls on both sides of me with houses, and I'm like, I don't know where to go. So I'm like, I'm going to back myself up against this wall, and I've got my backpack with all my belongings in it, and I'm like, they're going to crush me if I stay here. And my feet, they're my only transportation. So I'm like, I don't know, and I still have 5 miles to go this day, and so I'm like, I think I just need to keep walking. So I'm walking these cows down several blocks, and they keep walking with me. And I'm like, okay, they're following me. And then all of a sudden, that first cow starts hanging a left, and I look down, and there's actually an open field finally between all these houses. And they go, and I'm like, I guess they really weren't following me, this Midwesterner American in Spain walking and going on a different pathway. But I felt like they were following me. And so I really see that there was a tractor at the very back pushing them along, going in the way that they were going. But I wanted to say that, these cows were following me because I thought that was a pretty cool idea. My name is Abby Pepper. I'm one of the pastors here. And as a pastor, we are often called shepherds. And so today we are in the middle of Lent, where we are in the middle of a wilderness. And the idea even behind a pilgrimage is that you spend time walking a path in the wilderness so that God can transform us. And that's the idea behind Lent, is that we allow God's grace to transform us even more than we already are today. And so we've been looking at this idea in the Gospel of John, in which Jesus is sharing with us who he is. The Gospel of John looks at Jesus' divine nature, his pre-existence, and his identity as the Son of God. And the idea that he is the Word made flesh, that he is the invisible God made visible. So in this, we see two big questions in the Gospel of John. First, who is Jesus, and who are humans in response to who Jesus is? So the original audience of these narratives are trying to make sense who this Jesus guy is. He's a teacher, but he's making claims about being able to forgive sins, and only God, in their idea, could do that. And this teacher was breaking the religious laws of the days and doing things on the Sabbath that they weren't supposed to be doing. And so the teachers of the day, they were demanding Jesus to directly say, why are you doing this? Why are you making these claims? And so Jesus responds like he kind of always does, with kind of a muddied answer. And so he makes these metaphor statements, these I am statements that we've been looking at. And so he says, I am the bread of life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the door. I am the true vine. I am the light of the world. I am the resurrection and the life. So today we're going to look at Jesus identifying himself in this way. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. So there's a lot that we could unpack in this chapter 10 of John's gospel, but we're going to really look at two questions that really focus in on those larger questions of John. And so this is the first part of it here. What does it mean for Jesus to be a good shepherd? Second, what does it mean for Jesus to be our good shepherd? So the majority of us are city folk. I think it's easy to say in here. So I spent some time researching to, my own edification about what sheep and shepherds are and the relationship between the two. And so my first article that I came across, I was really asking the question, why do sheep need a shepherd? And so it describes sheep in this way, that they are dumb, directionless, and defenseless. And this sheep said this about it, right? They stuck out their tongue about that, right? They were upset about it, like, so, what if we are dumb, directionless, and defenseless? Well, it's evidence that they can't live without a shepherd. Sheep need constant care, and leaving them on their own could put them at risk, even risk of their own death. And so sheep are good at following the leader so much that I found even a couple of articles. It was kind of hard to confirm it to be true, but this article said in 2005 in Turkey that one sheep jumped off a cliff and 450 to even over 1,000 sheep followed that single sheep off the cliff. So again, evidence that sheep need a shepherd beyond themselves, because otherwise they're all going to lead themselves off a cliff. So sheep are completely dependent on the shepherd. The main purpose of a shepherd is to protect the sheep from wild animals and sheep stealers. So you've probably seen one of these shepherd's crooks. They're practical. They are helping the shepherd to be able to walk on rocky, uneven ground and to guide the sheep. And if they get stuck in the mud, you use the hook to pull them out. So if anybody needs this later to pull yourself out of mud, here you go. But again, it's a practical tool, but we've seen it in other times showing us what a shepherd is in the religious context of a leader, of the one that protects the flock that we have around us. So a shepherd then would guide the sheep out of these difficult situations that might end up in the sheep's own death. So you and I might find offense here when Jesus is calling us sheep, because you might be familiar that calling somebody a sheep is an insult, right? Historically, it's implying that people are easily influenced, that they're blindly following without having critical thinking skills, that they're just going to follow that first sheep off the cliff. So I know many of you in this room, and I believe we have more wits about us because we are very smart. We don't just easily, blindly follow others. We have some critical thinking skills, and we don't need constantly watched over. But I think we can all maybe identify with the idea that sometimes we feel directionless. Several times in my life, I know of being directionless, especially when I was figuring out what I was going to do for a living, wondering, hey, is this the right way to go? Or my relationships with friends and family, and, where should I live and how long, and all these questions and more. Really, the underlying question with all of that is what makes for a good life? What makes for a life of purpose? So if I asked a couple of you in here, a handful of you might say the best kind of life is this, that you need to get and maintain power, influence, money, status, and some kind of success. That leads to a good life. And then others of you might start saying that a good life is focused on making the lives of others better. And then others might say, carpe diem, seize the day. Or that YOLO, you only live once, so do whatever you want to do today, because this might be your only day. So who's right? All of these questions, who's right? Is it a mix of it? What is it? So now it might be easier to know that we can be sheep going astray. Because if we look at history and stories throughout Scripture, we see humanity's nature and pattern is that we struggle to navigate the landscape of the world all around us. We have examples of those patterns. And so like sheep, our vision is limited. Sometimes it's difficult to see beyond our own awareness, our own standards, our biases or assumptions about the world and how to live. And so we are prone to think that the grass is greener somewhere else. We are prone to wander, to take wrong turns, and to follow other voices that tell us how to live. Those voices might instill fear, some anxiety and division among us, and we tend to want to be the captain of our own ship. We want to define our lives by our own standards. We don't want anybody else to do it. So when we think in this way, Jesus is not trying to insult his original audience by calling them sheep, or even us, hearers later, when calling us sheep, but rather Jesus is saying that sheep cannot live on their own, but rather Jesus wants all of us to be not going astray. So sheep thrive when living under a good shepherd. The greater the relationship between the shepherd and the sheep means the greater the willingness to follow the shepherd. Even the most independent of us want somebody to guide us, to lead us in the way in which we should go. It does not matter how rich or poor, or whether we are educated or illiterate, or single or married, or morally upright, or have a questionable past or presence. Jesus is saying, I want to guide you. I want to guide all of you, and all of you are prone to wander. Jesus has a desire to provide, to protect, to nurture and nourish all of us. And so when Jesus is calling himself the Good Shepherd in this narrative, he is pointing to all these other references throughout Scripture that the audience of that time would have known about. Like how the prophet Isaiah tells us, God is the shepherd of Israel. The prophet of Jeremiah warned people of being led astray by false shepherds, which were false teachers. And then the prophet Micah prophesied about a future shepherd who would rule God's people. So then there's Psalm 23. You likely know it. If you've ever been to a funeral, likely a family, if they don't have anything else, this is the one that they go to because they believe and willing to surrender their lives to God. So here it is. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So Psalm 23 here is expressing a believer's trust in God, who is represented by a loving shepherd, guiding through good and bad times, and it speaks of the surrender and the companionship of God and that reckless love that is available to each and every one of us. So David, an ancestor of our faith and of Jesus, was the author of many psalms, specifically this one. And before David became the king of Israel, he was a shepherd boy. In fact, the day that the prophet Samuel went to anoint David, he went to the farmland of Jesse, which is David's father. And here we have the 7 older brothers of David lined up because Jesse's like, all of these sons are strong, they're able. I'm sure this is going to be one of the next kings. And so when the prophet Samuel goes through that entire line and says, that one's not it, that one's not it, that one's not it. Jesse, do you have any more sons? And then Jesse is like, actually, David, he's out, attending the sheep. He's out in the field. But you don't need him, right? The one that you need is here. It's as if Jesse even said that David was not worthy to have a promotion from shepherd to king of Israel. You see, being a shepherd in the first century Palestine was considered to not be a privileged position. They would often be ridiculed by the religious leaders of the day, even because they couldn't keep the laws of the day, because of the nature of their job was messy and they were doing unclean things by the laws of the day. And it was a dangerous job that they could even lose their life because of their willingness to lay down their life. So we still have shepherds in the Holy Land today. This is one of our shepherds, Pastor Sherry, who went astray from our group and found this shepherd boy in Bethlehem. And she did make it back, so then she can lead us all, right? So here's a couple of other references in the Gospels. In the Gospel of Luke specifically, at the very beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ's birth, the angels go and announce to who? Shepherds, tending their flock by night. And then the shepherds then go tell everybody, this is the good news. So I find it very fascinating in that narrative that Jesus' birth is not announced to the powers of the day. But rather, the good news is told to the people on the margins, the people that are told that they are unclean and not worthy of even this good news. The second is the parable of the lost sheep. We might know it, leaving the 99 to go after the one. And again, these are all metaphors, so think of it as people and not animals. And then think about it as an economic point if we are still thinking about sheep. That it's reckless to leave that value of money, of animals, to go after the one. It is reckless. But it shows us that God goes to many, many lengths to go and find us, and that each and every one of us is worth more than all of the ones together, if Jesus is thinking about each and every one of us as being worthy of God's love. John is telling us that we don't need any shepherd, but we need a good shepherd. So this is how Jesus is going to say, I am different from all the other leaders in your life. So this is our second question here. Jesus is saying, I am a good shepherd. He puts an adjective here and is putting himself separate from all the other followers or all the other leaders that have gone before him. And he shows this through comparing a hired hand and a shepherd. So back here in John 10, the hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks and the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. So the hired hand does not have the buy-in like the shepherd does here. The hired hand is just doing their job and is willing to run away at the first hint of danger. It's not their livelihood at risk, so they run away. So we see this further shown to us in the Old Testament. The prophet Ezekiel talks about a good shepherd and a bad shepherd. Again, here, we are talking about the leaders of the day that the prophet Ezekiel is sharing with us. Woe to you, shepherds of Israel, who only take care of yourselves. Should not the shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds and clothe yourself with the wool and slaughter the choice animals. But you do not take care of the flock. You do not strengthen the weak or heal the sick or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally, and so they were scattered because there were no shepherd. And when they were scattered, they became food for all the wild animals. My sheep wandered over all the mountains, on every high hill. They were scattered over the whole earth, and no one searched or looked for them. So through the prophet Ezekiel here, God is passing judgment on these leaders, saying that you have not laid down your life for them. God is saying, where were you, shepherds? Where were you when the people around you were injured? Where were you when they needed fed? Where were you when you allowed them to be vulnerable to predators? You were just leaning against a fence post, it seems, or you were even absent from the field. So instead, in contrast, the prophet Ezekiel says, this is what a good shepherd does, and this is what God will do. I myself will tend the sheep and have them lie down, declares the Lord. I will search for the lost and bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak. For the sleek and the strong I will destroy. I will shepherd the flock with justice. So how does this then connect to Jesus? Well, Jesus is the visible of the invisible God. Jesus is taking on God in the flesh. And so Jesus then starts to say, I'm taking on this role of good shepherd in my life. And so Jesus, this long-awaited good shepherd, when he first begins his ministry, he starts to say this: For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. He also announced that he was anointed to proclaim good news to the poor, freedom for the prisoner and recovery of sight to the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And he said he did not come to be served, but to serve, and that he was going to lay down his life as ransom for the many. So if we hear all of these different references to good and bad shepherds, we put that into our own life to think about the shepherds in our lives. Think about the influences that you first had in life. Many of our shepherds are first our parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, and then in our school setting, our teachers and professors, our work setting, our supervisors and bosses, and then in society, our politicians and pastors, community leaders, all of those. How are they influencing? How are their voices guiding you in the way in which you go, in the past and in the present? Are you aware of the impact of their influence on your life right now? Those other voices might be encouraging things like individualism, like your way or no way. Or they might say those other people, they need to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. Or consumerism of a wasteful spending of material goods and capitalism of wasteful spending and greed. Are the trusted voices in your life encouraging you in the way of the Good Shepherd? Or are they leading you astray? Are they creating a division or a conflict of interest in the way that Jesus is saying to go? Because if the shepherds in your life are following the Good Shepherd too, those shepherds would be leading you to feed the hungry. They would be leading you to clothe the naked, to visit and heal the sick. They will lead you to protect the widow and the orphan. They will lead you to welcome the stranger and offer hospitality to the foreigner, to forgive debts, to advocate for the voiceless, and they will encourage you to take care of the planet and to turn our weapons into garden tools for the renewal of the earth. And if they aren't leading you to do these things, Jesus is saying, those are bad shepherds, don't follow them. Because a mark of the sheep of Jesus' flock is that they listen to his voice and do what he did. We can better hear Jesus' voice leading us in the way in which we should go by reading the Gospels, spending time looking at what Jesus did and who he spent time with. We can take time to be still and have silence in which all those other voices can be taken away so that we can listen to the voice of God within us. People were drawn to Jesus because of his compassion, his healing, and most importantly, his sacrificial love. Jesus displays his sacrificial love in this way. Going back to John's gospel here, the reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have the authority to lay it down and the authority to take it back up. This command I receive from my Father. The greatest evidence of Jesus' sacrificial love is that he who was sinless laid down his life for each and every one of us, that he picked up his cross and he paid the price for all of our sins. The crucifixion was not the end of Jesus' ministry, but it was a catalyst, because on that cross, he had a victory over death. The Good Shepherd laid down his life as a sacrificial lamb so that all of us, generation after generation of people, could be included into the flock of Jesus Christ. Every day, because of that, Jesus says, "Come, follow me." Jesus says, "Come, follow me." Follow me in the way of sacrificial love. This way does not always look like the way of life because you have to die to self. It is sacrificial. But it is in our dying to self that we are raised to new life just in the same way as Jesus Christ. Jesus is a countercultural shepherd leading us in the way to go. But sometimes it feels weird to follow after a faith in this countercultural shepherd, to surrender, to sacrifice our comfort, to depend on others, to trust everything we have to someone else, like Jesus Christ. But the reason this feels weird to our nature is because our nature has been shaped by everything around us, those other shepherds in our lives. But we must never forget that Jesus is offering us something better than what we have right now. And a more abundant life is available. So again, Lent is this time when we ask ourselves, Where have we gone astray? Where have we listened to other voices? It's a time to remind ourselves that the grace of God is available each and every day to transform us even more like the Good Shepherd. Because God is so reckless with love that God invites us back each and every time. God is reckless with love because it's always been available to us. It's a time to remember that God will chase us down wherever we have wandered and say, come back. This is the pathway to go. This is the sacrificial way to go, but it is the way to life. So I'm going to invite the band to come back up here, and we're going to end a little bit different today. Jesus is calling out to us still today. I am still the Good Shepherd. I am the one that will watch over you. I will protect you. I will lead you. I will walk alongside you in each valley and beside any quiet or still waters that you find yourself. This is the way to go. This is how I love you, and this is how you should love each and every one around you, sacrificially. This is how you should love others. Consider where you are in your walk with a Good Shepherd. Trust him. And accept that invitation to come follow him. So we're going to pray together that famous Psalm 23 as we recommit to following the Good Shepherd, who is the one and the way. Join your voices with mine. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Accept the invitation, follow the Good Shepherd and the way of life, sacrificial life that is.